Property guru George Markowski from Positive Property Solution joins us now. George, good morning to you.
How are you, George?
You've got to hang out with guys like George who know the numbers. Get the real numbers, the facts. Because I can talk to you about cash flow and all those things. George is better at that than me. The thing I'm ecstatic about George, he is a hardcore teacher. He really wants you to learn.
Okay guys, we've got 10 seconds left. Can't wait to show you a great, amazing session tonight. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, freedom fighters, and welcome to tonight's live. I'm feeling very honoured to have here Xenia from our Circle of Manager and many other things, and we're going to be talking about landlords, tenants, property management, everything in between. So if you can hear us, type in the chat, G to G, good to go. If you are watching tonight, you do hashtag live so that we know you're there. And if you are watching the replay tonight in the chat, hashtag replay. So Xenia, tell me, tonight is rent by repeat. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners tonight inside scope on property management to make sure they've got the right, everything is aligned for them and making some great money on their investment properties. So over to you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. So we've got a few questions here. Do you want me to run through the questions one by one, or do you want to ask something specific? Or
how about we start with whether or not you actually need a real estate agent when you're buying you need one? Can we do it ourselves? What are the benefits of having a property manager?
Sure. So whether you need a property manager and doing it yourself. So if you're going to do it yourself, everything needs to go perfectly, right? So you need a property manager to step in when things go wrong, and in reality, like, things do go wrong. So let's consider something like rent arrears. You can screen the tenant to the nth degree. So you can, when we screen tenants, we make sure that they've got a good rental history. You make sure that they paid the rent on time in the past. You make sure that they're screened in terms of, that they haven't damaged the property in the past. But we can't screen them on things like how well they manage their money, or how stable their job is, or how stable their marriage is, or how sick they are. So these are the things that can actually go wrong in the property. So a tenant can get sick and then not pay the rent, or they can get divorced, or they can lose their job or get another job interstate and leave, which means that there's some arrears to handle. So when you're handling those arrears, it is actually very hard as a landlord to handle that process, that legal process, because it is quite a complicated legal process to go through to chase up those arrears.
Yeah, and especially if you don't have the expertise either, and to get the resources you need so that you can handle a situation like that. And while you're out there, please type the questions into the chat, and we will be answering them as we go along.
Yeah. So if you look at the financial side of things, if I could just keep going, Charmaine, just for the purpose of information, 5% of Australians will run into some kind of financial trouble at some stage of their life. Now, when you're considering that your tenant has a 5% chance of falling into arrears, this is where you need a property manager, and you also need a good insurance policy on that property just to protect your interests. So we've covered a few questions. What happens if the tenant refuses to pay rent, goes into arrears, the legal process. Do you want me to talk about the legal process of chasing arrears?
So I guess if a landlord was to find themselves in that kind of, how does actually having a property manager actually help support them versus just having your land?
Yeah, that's right. If they've got a property manager, they don't have to do anything. All they need to do is instruct the property manager to take legal action on the tenants. If they don't have a property manager, then they need the correct forms and follow the correct procedure, give the tenant the correct amount of time, and then take them through that legal process. So it's not a matter of just getting them out, because you want them out. There is quite a detailed process to get a tenant out of the property, or to even put them on a payment plan to pay. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I mean, when you're property, one question, a lot of individuals have is, how do you kind of rent to expect from your property? Is it better to go with a property manager, or there are properties that have their own in-house property managers that actually live on site? I mean, who do we go through? Do we go through a property manager on site, or is it better to get an independent? What do
Sorry, what the question was?
So how do you determine what rent to expect from a particular property?
Okay. So how to set the rental value on a particular property? So I would look at the comparative market analysis. So we would look at what properties have been rented in that area, within a 6 kilometre or within a 10 kilometre radius for the past 6 months. Look at the bonds that have been lodged, because that will tell you real rent. And then look at things like realestate.com.au and domain.com.au and see what other agents in the area are renting those properties for. And then we look at the properties and what they're renting and compare them to ours. Is ours a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger, and you kind of adjust it from there. In putting all of that together, then you come up with a rent range. And then I like to try on top of the rent range or just above the rent range and see how we go. The rule of thumb for me is that if I haven't gotten inquiries within, say, the first day or so, then we do an open inspection. If that if no one turns up to that open inspection, the rent is too high. So tenants don't tend to negotiate. They don't tend to, ring you up and say, it's advertised for 570, but you know what, I want to give you 500. They just move on to the next property. So it's not like sales where, you can go up a range and they will negotiate it down. They don't usually negotiate down the rent. You pretty much got to get it right. A lot of tenants will offer more rent. Very little tenants will offer less.
Fantastic. I mean, that's really good, like leading indicator if you've just purchased a property and looking to got an existing property and you're wanting your rent to go up. How frequently about increasing our rent? Is it yearly? Is it every time is it seasonally, or is it yearly? How does that work, and what is the best way to go about it? Do property generally do it themselves, or do you, the landlord, need to make sure that you're connected to ensure that is looking at being increased every year?
Yeah, every year. So we used to be able to do it mid-tenancy, but the laws have changed, certainly in South Australia, where you cannot increase the rent during the term of a tenancy. So you've got to wait to the end of the term. So 3 months before the end of the tenancy, we'll do a comparative market analysis. And because you have to justify, if a tenant is in the property, you have to justify the rent because if they challenge it, then you're going to have to justify it legally while you're increasing the rent to that price. So you would do a comparative market analysis and then get instructed. And then what we do is getting instructions from the landlord saying that your rent, should be $10 more, $20 more, whatever it is, and then we offer the tenant that amount. So yeah, once a year. And I think George had a really good idea. Is in that if the market is flat, just increase it by $5, because $5 is better than nothing.
Fantastic. No, I do love that. And I guess, what happens if a tenant, later down the track or some point refuses to? How do you handle, that particular scenario?
refuses the rent increase?
Correct, yes.
Oh, okay, so what we do in our office is that we will offer them a new lease on these terms, and then we'll offer them what's called a Form 2A termination of notice. So it's either accept the rent increase, accept the new lease. You either sign a new lease or you leave. So yeah,
Nice and clear. Keeps it nice and clear, and I'm assuming you're doing this a month prior to the lease, or 2 months prior
3 months
to the lease.
3 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
3 months.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. We leave plenty of notice. Sometimes the tenant will come back and say, I will accept a lease, a new lease. I can sign a new lease, but on the current rent. Or say we've tried to increase it by $20 a week. The tenant will say, I will accept the $10 a week increase, and then we will go back to the landlord and say that the tenants offered $10 instead of $20. Would you accept that? If they don't, then the Form 2A stands because the termination notice is already there. If the landlord accepts it, then we'll do a whole new lease extensions and that.
Fantastic. And that manager plenty of time that if they don't accept the rent increase, to be able to advertise and get other to the lease expiring as well, which is fantastic. We chat, and please, freedom fighters, this is your opportunity to ask Xenia any questions. Utilize this time. Ask Xenia many questions. She's here for you and to support you. You can grow. We do have a question here for you, Xenia. Is having a property manager a good one? Because that helps us with our cash flow when we're working out the numbers and whether we're going to have a... Xenia, can we claim your services as a tax deduction?
Yeah, we can.
Woo-hoo!
Yeah.
We're winning.
Because it's part of the expenses. Yeah, it's part of the expenses against that rental property. So yeah, it is tax deductible. Yeah.
So let's talk a bit more about how frequently as a landlord do we want our properties to be to ensure that everything is fine, there's no damages, quarterly, once a year, or what legally can we do to ensure that our property is being taken?
Yeah, sure. So there's 3 types of inspections that a property manager should do on a property. They vacate inspections at the end of the tenancy, and then ingoing inspections at the beginning of the tenancy. Each one of those has about up to 1,000 photos because everything is photographed, and those are fairly harsh inspections. So we want everything to be perfect. To maintain the property, we do routine inspections. Legally, we can go in every 12 weeks. So in our office, it's every 12 weeks on the dot, we go into the property. And with routine inspections, they're not as detailed. So obviously the tenant is living there, human beings are living in that property. So, we don't go into the property and open up drawers and, become a menace for the tenant. So what we're looking at is maintenance issues, making sure that the tenant is looking after the property, if the property is being damaged. I was just actually writing an article on that this morning because there's a lot of agents that are going in and looking at how the tenant is actually living in the property, which I think is a little bit unfair. So we just got we just got a property from another agency, and we did the first inspection not that long ago. And when I walked in, the lady was so embarrassed because she didn't do her laundry, and I thought,
I think every woman feels that way, don't they? You come in the house, dishes are like.
I know, but I had to reassure her that we weren't there to have a look at her laundry, and I didn't care.
Yeah.
But a lot of property managers will go in and they'll have a look at. One of my girlfriends is actually renting, and the property manager went in and she looked in her oven and she said, you didn't clean your griller properly, and I thought, well, that is just not okay. It's bordering on bullying and harassment for the tenant, because they didn't leave the griller plate dirty at the end of the tenancy. So you've really got no recourse to say to somebody, you need to clean your griller, you know. So
No, a little bit over the line. And I guess that's where having a property manager is really good as well, on the boundaries and what you as a landlord can enforce and what you can actually affect, obviously the tenants, because they have their own rights as well. And so we need to make sure that so that you feel protected as a landlord, and so you're getting the best benefits, out of your tenant as well.
Yeah, exactly. And you've got to consider that if you're bordering on bullying for the tenants, then you're going to cause a vacancy in that property. So the property managers should never be a bottleneck in the investor's journey. They should actually be an asset. So if they're bullying the tenants and the tenants leave and causing a vacancy, then the property manager is actually causing expenses for the landlord unnecessarily.
Fantastic. We do have another question from one of our viewers. Breaks the lease, but found someone who is willing to take over the lease. About the property manager says transfer and choose to advertise the property and ask the tenant to pay for it. I think we're missing the last part of that. Pay for.
What if the tenant breaks the lease on somebody who's willing to take over the lease?
And ask the tenants to pay.
Oh, they said that they don't do lease transfer. It's true. Okay, I think I can answer that question. So, the property manager's right. They can't do a lease transfer to another lease. What they can do during a lease break, what happens is a whole new lease. So it's a brand new lease on the property. It does take over the current lease. So the outgoing tenant has to pay rent until there's a new tenant in the property. Right. So, but it is a brand new lease that's being done. So the new tenant that is being found enters into a brand new lease agreement. And yes, they do need to pay advertising costs and lease break costs and whatever expenses are associated with leasing that property, including property management fees. So letting expenses for the real estate agent, that the outgoing tenant who has broken the lease pays that or a portion of that. And it's not, they don't actually pay the whole lot. There is a formula. There's I don't know what the formula is, but it works out that if they break the lease right at the beginning of the lease, they have to pay all of it. If it's in the middle, they pay half. And if they break it at the end of the lease, then there's hardly anything to pay.
Fantastic. And just coming back to our last point about, doing and making sure the property is up to scratch and your tenants are looking after it. You did notice some damage or even like during your internal inspection, the tenant has moved out and you've noticed some damages. What happens in that process?
Okay, that happens a lot. So if they've damaged something, and if it's during the routine inspection, anything that you find that is not okay, the tenant is notified of that and they're asked to actually rectify it. So it could be anything from the lawn hasn't been mowed or sometimes there might be like a hole behind the door from the doorknob or because they've hit it too hard or something like that. So we would write them a letter saying that this is what we've noticed. You've got a chance to rectify it. If you don't rectify it, then we will send out maintenance and bill you.
Got it.
At the end of the lease, if they do, we actually evicted a property tenant just before Christmas, 2 days before Christmas, which wasn't very nice, but that was a date that SACAT gave us. And she left. There wasn't a lot of damage on the property. There was a lot of rubbish and stuff left on the property because when tenants are being evicted, it's usually because they're not paying rent. And if they're not paying rent, it's because they don't have money. If they don't have money, they're not going to pay for trailers and stuff to remove furniture. So everything was left behind. So what you do in that situation is you just get it cleaned up. So you've got to think of a property as an investment. It's an investment. If it's not making money, you cut your losses, get it cleaned up, fixed up and rented as soon as possible, and then get it making money for you again. So again, you know,
Fantastic.
the landlord should not have to do any of that. The landlord shouldn't have to lift a finger, actually. The property managers should take care of all of that, and that's our job. That's what we do.
And we've got a few more questions. So, do you manage properties in just Adelaide or Eastern?
We will be managing properties in Queensland, probably this year or next year. So we've got that definitely on the cards. But you know, right now it's just in Adelaide.
Fantastic. And how much percentage are you allowed to increase the rent? A little bit this earlier in our discussion, but is there a bit of a rule of thumb with percentage every year, or it just depends?
Oh, no, not really. No. If you looked at the rental spike in Adelaide, that happened 2021, 2022, some of that was like 30-40%. So there's no real thing. It's like, what is a tenant willing to pay for that property? That's your rule of thumb. What is the market telling you?
Fantastic. So please get your questions in. I do want to share a bit of exciting news, and that is George is actually opening the curtain, and we are running a 5-day our community to get an opportunity to see behind the scenes and get to test drive. So this is really for individuals or part of our community who've been sitting on the fence. You kind of, but you're not sure, or perhaps you've been thinking about positive property and wanting to know how we help individuals invest in property. And if you are, what is definitely for you. So please type in the chat hashtag. During the 5-day challenge, you will have access to all of our trainings and materials, so you really get to see exactly what we do. And this is a first for George, and we won't be on this again. So it's really restricted to the first 100 individuals register for this event. And if you, that's my announcement. I got caught up on a bit of a loop there. But again, know what we do. Please just type in the chat hashtag test drive so you get an opportunity to see things. Now, Xenia, we're going to have to get moving shortly to our next group. So this is our group that we have for our members, but there are a few more questions that we have. So I'm going to questions very quickly so that we can get ready for our next private group. So Xenia, what are the important insurance should cover? Does the insurance vary from one company to another company?
Insurance? Are you talking about the insurance or
insurance? So what are the important aspects that your landlord insurance?
Okay. I think the number one thing that you need to look for on landlord's insurance is the number one thing that property managers put a claim on the most, and that is rent arrears. So we cover rent arrears a lot more than damage. I mean, a lot more. If you consider what I said earlier, that 5% of Australians will fall into financial trouble at some stage. So the tenants are not doing this deliberately. They just don't know how to manage their money. They need somebody like George educating them. So the average person doesn't know how to manage their money. They fall into arrears. So the number one thing that you need your landlord's insurance to cover is rent arrears. And the good landlord's insurances actually have no excess on rent arrears claims. So, right. And because the bad ones, there are bad ones out there. The bad ones will actually use the bond as an excess. Now, that's just destroyed your chances of claiming anything else through the bond.
That's right.
Because, yeah, so because when a tenant falls into arrears like the one that we evicted just before Christmas, we want to use the bond for things that are non-insurable. So things like cleaning and gardening and getting rid of rubbish, the insurance doesn't cover any of that. So we want to apply the bond to those non-insurable items. So we don't want to use the bond as an excess. Otherwise, the landlord's going to end up paying a lot more out of their pocket if they don't have the right insurance on board. So I would look for a policy that has no excess on
Fantastic.
default claims.
Okay, we're coming up to our hour for tonight's session. Is the residential handbook the same across all states from state to state?
Okay, I'm assuming that they mean the Residential Tenancies Act, and
Assuming
it
so.
differs. It
Yeah.
differs from state to state.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Freedom Fighters, for tonight's session. Thank you, Xenia, and sharing a bit more of an insight with property management. Again, in test driving our program, please type in the chat. #test is a great opportunity to see behind the scenes and see exactly what George and the team members invest in property. So, Xenia, I'm going to see you in our show Thursday evening. Bye.
Thank you. We'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.